Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. Today, a very quick video. Well, I say that and I'll probably end up making a half an hour wristwatch talk episode. Anyway, I will try and keep this short and sweet. Quick wristwatch check before I get into it. I am actually wearing Giancarlo's little Datejust. This is the grey slate dial Datejust. I forget the reference. We just talked about it in a previous video. He's borrowed my Fortis. Well, the Fortis I've been lent by Fortis. So he's having some time with that, and he very graciously entrusted me with this gorgeous Datejust, and I've put it on a grey suede strap for two reasons. First of all, I don't want to scratch his beloved Jubilee bracelet, and second of all, I think it really plays off with that dial. So anyway, wristwatch check done. Let's roll the intro and get into today's video. Now, before we get into this particular subject, I really highly advise you to watch a previous video. I'll leave a link also in the description, called 15 Watch Buying Mistakes. This video is kind of not really the official part 2, but a continuation. Because what happens when you've done the research, you've watched that video, you've tried on a ton of watches, and you've found the two you really love the most, but you can't decide between them. I get asked almost daily kind of hypothetical question. Well, not hypothetical. I get asked for my advice. TGV, which would you recommend? Can't decide between the Rolex Submariner or the Omega Speedmaster. At first, I'm perplexed because they're very different watches, but then in actually thinking about it, the two most iconic watches of all time. So I can understand if you've whittled it down to those two. I've certainly been there myself. But how do you choose between the two if you're really having a tough time? So I've nailed it down to five. I'm trying to remember how to count. 5 key kind of bits of advice or things to take into consideration. Now, first of all is budget. This kind of splits into subcategories. First of all, you want to consider how much the timepiece is going to cost to service further down the line. The more expensive the watch, the more complicated, the more complications it has, the more higher end it is in the whole watch tier spectrum, the more expensive it's going to cost to service eventually. Depends if you buy used, new, vintage, when the last service was. There's a lot of factors. If this watch is for you and you have a bit of a habit of flipping, do consider its resale value. If you love the watch, beyond any of this considerations, then of course disregard this completely. Sometimes, I know how it is, you fall in love with a watch and money is not a part of it, but I would take that into consideration, and especially if you are buying this as hopefully something that will be a family heirloom, you might want to consider something a little bit more of a safer investment. So that can help determine what route to take. If it's a rare or extremely unique piece, sourcing parts is definitely going to be a difficulty. That is one major advantage of going with a movement like an ETA or an ETA, that is, that the parts are certainly more accessible. It's certainly going to be a lot less to service in the future. But not just on the movement, I think we should also take into consider all parts of the watch. A watch does not have to be expensive to be. I mean, look at some of the vintage Timexes. Some of the parts are incredibly difficult to find because it's just not produced, or it's so old that the parts are not viable anymore. Okay, moving on to number 2, and that is the watch's style, how it matches your attire. the colors of the watch, Always take that into consideration. The louder, the more brash the colors, the more chances it's going to clash with perhaps your colors that you wear on a daily basis. But also, stylistically, think about the genre of the watch. Are you a dress watch kind of guy? Obviously, if you're trying to decide between a G-Shock and a dress watch and you wear a suit every day, then obviously the dress watch is it's common sense. I've noticed that watches of a monochromatic color scheme, like the Speedy, like the Submariner, and well, unless you get Speedy Racing or something a little bit more, with a bit more pizzazz, but they tend to be more versatile, especially if you are kind of a guy who likes straps, NATO straps, leather straps, rubber straps, that kind of thing. The more classic and the more understated the color scheme, the more versatile it's going to be. This is an observation. Well, if you've watched my reviews, you'll notice that. And the Speedy and the Sub are probably two of the most versatile when it comes to well, they are true strap monsters, they really are. I'd have to say that from my experience, the Speedmaster wears a little bit more dressier. It tends to go with more leather straps, even though obviously it's a sports racing chronograph originally before it, Also, stylistically, keep in mind, the more classic or iconic the watch, the more chance it's going to have of always being in style, especially size and color. Even though we've seen a resurgence of that style recently, or two-tone, for example, apparently two-tone's coming back, God knows if that's true. I'm sure there'll be a resurgence of big watches probably in 10 years' time. These days we're going smaller again, more conservative. So keep these aspects in mind when deciding a watch. Try and pick something or go towards the one with the more classic size. If we go back to our prime examples, the Speedy and the Sub, the Speedy is 42, well, it depends on which version you get, but they're actually quite traditional sizes. The Sub, I think, is the safer bet there because it's 40 mils, I think is always a safe bet. Especially if it's going to be a family heirloom. If you buy one of these loud, very involved, flashy pieces, when it comes to hand it down, it might not be desirable. It might not be something that the next generation wants to wear. The more classic the watch, the more chances it's going to be longer lasting in the future, or future proof. Nothing is future proof, but if you look at a classic 60s Timex, it's everlasting. It's always going to be good taste. It just is. It's so classic. Anyway. Okay, moving on. Number 3, I would always consider your lifestyle when trying to choose between two watches. And what do I mean by lifestyle? I'm talking about the kind of activities you do every day, what you do for a living. For example, if you're in law enforcement, obviously stay away from very delicate horology dress watches. Unless you're sitting at a desk, or perhaps you're a police commissioner, but then again, you might be sending out the wrong signals. If you are looking for an everyday watch, make sure that that everyday watch can handle the environment you work in, tasks you're going to be doing. If you're very active, go with the sports watch. Perhaps if you travel a lot, then I would go more towards the diver rather than the chronograph. In fact, actually, that's why I think divers are just so popular, especially among gentlemen, because they're fantastic travel companions. They can handle the beach, and at the same time, like James Bond, you can wear them formally now. And that can determine also the type of movement you get. If you are, I don't know, let's say you are a zookeeper, then again, you might be better off with a, and I'm thinking zookeeper because I'm thinking about that time when I was walking only, I bashed my Tudor and I cracked the crystal. So I've learned since not to wear acrylic crystals when walking a dog. I mean, I know it should have been obvious. Going back to our example, the Speedmaster is obviously not going to be as robust as the Submariner. So, think about what you're going to be doing every day. Okay, so moving on to number 4. Consider what you have in your own collection already. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe you need to try a chronograph if you haven't before. I would suggest going with something more affordable just to kind of dip your toe in the water, so to speak. Having said that, if you know that you are a true diver watch guy and you had chronographs before and they came and went, then perhaps stick to the diver, you know. But also I think consider what is in your collection. Consider what colors you have. If you've got 4 blue dialed divers, maybe it's time to get a black Submariner. Then again, your collecting philosophy might be the one where you want, you know, a particular theme. I know a chap who collects only Seiko divers, and he wanted his ultimate collection was to have everything from the early 60s Seiko divers all the way to the most contemporary, an evolution of the divers over the decades. I think he had one from every decade. The only problem is with that, it kind of constricts him to determining what he's going to get next. But I do kind of admire that, and it's a lovely kind of story to show in a collection. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Back to what I was saying. If you have, for example, if you're a 3-watch collection guy, you have a chronograph, a GMT, then yeah, I think a diver would complement them, or go for something more dressy. I wouldn't, and this is a very important point to stress, don't ever make a decision just based on one of these factors. I think these are all factors you have to take into consideration. Okay, so let's move on to number 5, and that is time. I really can't stress to take your time. Don't rush into it, especially if you're deciding between 2 watches. You know, you've done all that research. You've whittled it down to 2 watches. I think especially if you're spending, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars on a luxury watch, I do think it's imperative not to rush it. And I did this with the Explorer. I took my time. I was ready to buy that watch actually months ago. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a fad, it wasn't a crush, a watch crush. A, because you know, it's a lot of money, and B, because I've noticed I do go through these phases where I'm yearning after a watch, and then suddenly it stops and I'm just on to the next one. With the Explorer, I realized that it wasn't something that's going to go away. I may get bored of it in 2 months, a week, or 2 years. It depends. I try and make sure that it's as close to true love as possible. I think the Navi Timer is a prime example where I'm still madly, deeply in love with that watch. The Submariner, the Squally 1521, you know, watches like that, I'm still in love with. So time really determines that. The chances are that one of them is as time progresses, one of them is going to be less favorable than the other. And I think time only shows true love. If you really still love and want both equally after months of deliberating and taking all of these factors into consideration, go with my last point. Actually, this should be number 6, and that is to really think about which one does it for you. I mean, this is a very inexplicable feeling, but at the end of the day, disregard everything I've said, disregard everything you've heard other people say, and go with what you really, really love. It's the only true thing. We talked about this in my 15 mistakes videos, that it's something that you can only really tell when you try the watch on. I know it's difficult with online boutiques these days, especially living in certain parts of the country. You don't always have access, especially some more obscure kind of boutique style brands. You know, I took a risk on the Zin 104, but it paid off. I took a risk on the Squally 1521, but it did pay off. Anyway guys, very short and sweet. I hope that helps. To all the people that email me every day trying to, you know, TGV, should I buy this? Watch A or watch B? Take those factors into consideration. Look very carefully at the watch. I had one guy actually recently ask me, he wanted to choose between a Tudor Pelagos and a Submariner. And yes, they are the same genre. So he's whittled it down to 2 automatic divers, and both really from not the same company but the same kind of family, right? Yet the nuances and differences I can understand. but yet they are very, very different in their own ways. And also we have the whole brand association dynamic going on, you know, the luxury blingy, not blingy, but the connotations of the brand Rolex, and the understated kind of connoisseur, enthusiast allure of Tudor. That's a very interesting choice of two watches. Anyway, guys, I hope he listened to this, and I hope this kind of helped. Please do share watches that you're having a difficulty deciding between in the comments. Let's see if the Gentry can help you. Sometimes we need a fresh perspective or an outside perspective to help us look at things in a new light. I think actually that should be rule number 7, seek an outside perspective, although that can be a bit detrimental, especially the wrong perspective. Anyway, yeah, that's a whole nother video. So thoughts, queries, comments, all the rest of it, please down below. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, found it useful, and as always, guys, I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.